you add up all the begats in the book of Genesis, for example, you get an age for the earth, 6,000 years old, plus or minus a little. The universe is said to be exactly as old as the earth. This is still the standard of Jewish, Christian, and Muslim fundamentalists, and is clearly reflected in the Jewish calendar. But so young a universe raises an awkward question. How is it that there are astronomical objects more than 6,000 light years away? It takes light a year to travel a light year, 10,000 years to travel 10,000 light years, and so on. When we look at the center of the Milky Way galaxy, the light we see left its source some 30,000 years ago. The nearest spiral galaxy like our own, M31 in the constellation Andromeda, is 2 million light years away. So we're seeing it as it was when the light from it set out on its long journey to Earth 2 million years ago. And when we observe distant quasars 5 billion light years away, we're seeing them as they were 5 billion years ago before the Earth was formed. They are almost certainly very different today. So if, despite this, we were to accept the literal truth of such religious books, how could we reconcile the data? The only plausible conclusion, I think, is that God recently made all the photons of light arriving on the Earth in such a coherent format as to mislead generations of astronomers into the misapprehension that there are such things as galaxies and quasars, and intentionally driving them to the spurious conclusion that the universe is vast and old. This is such a malevolent theology, I still have difficulty believing that anyone, no matter how devoted to the divine inspiration of any religious book, could seriously entertain it. Beyond this, the radioactive dating of rocks, the abundance of impact craters on many worlds, the evolution of the stars, and the expansion of the universe each provides compelling and independent evidence that our universe is many billions of years old, despite the confident assertions of revered theologians that a world so old directly contradicts the Word of God, and that at any rate information on the antiquity of the world is inaccessible except to faith. These lines of evidence as well would have to be manufactured by a deceptive and malicious deity, unless the world is much older than the literalists in the Judeo-Christian Islamic religion suppose.
Well, there are different solutions out there. I know of at least 5 others out there, but in the last couple of years I've published my own proposal for one. I call it the Dasha solution. And I would like to point out that the problem is not well formulated, as I just laid out. It's actually, the situation's even worse. Instead of looking at it at the end of creation, 6,000 years after the creation, let's look at it on day 6. Adam's created, the creation is finished, night falls, it's the beginning of day 7. Adam looks up and what does he see?
Stars.
Had to see the stars because you see they were given functions on day 4, what things are supposed to do, and if you can't see them, they can't fulfill their functions. The nearest star after the sun is more than 4 light years away, and I don't think Adam waited, oh, there's one after 4 years and 3 months or so, then there's another one. It didn't happen that way. He saw probably pretty much what we see today. So instead of thinking out of the most distant objects in the universe, how about trying the closest stars to us? How did the light get here at the end of day 6, or probably day 4 even? If you can answer that question, you can probably answer all the rest of the starlight. And starting from that approach, I also began comparing the different days of creation. I got this term I'm trying to coin. I haven't really trotted it out too much. I call it process creation. Not progressive creation, not process theology. Those are both bad ideas, but process creation. Many times people erroneously think that everything's ex nihilo. Poof, there's a tree. Poof, there's a whale. That's not what the text says if you read it very carefully. If you read about Adam, for instance, God shaped him out of the dust of the ground and he breathed on him and became a living soul. That's a process. Didn't take very long, but I don't think it was instantaneous. On the day 3 account, it talks of it says, let the earth bring forth these plants. And if you look at the words of the two words translated to the King James, at least bring forth and brought forth, these two different words, these verbs, suggest this very rapid abnormal growth shooting up, thrusting up out of the ground like a time-lapse movie or something. We see the dry land appearing on day 3 as well, and I don't think it just poof, it happened. They had waters that receded, land that shot up. There were some processes going on. On day 6, he said, let the earth bring forth all these animals. These animals apparently came out of the ground like Adam. There's a suggestion of the waters doing the same thing on day 5. So I think on several of the days of creation week, we see what I would call process creation. Not evolutionary, not slow, not gradual, but still a process, very rapid, very directed. So I said, well, what happened on day 3 with the plants? Well, like a time-lapse movie, this little sapling comes out of the ground, it gains in height and girth, branches, twigs, leaves, acorns.
But they did all that within the little 24-hour period.
Or actually probably a few minutes, maybe.
Yes.
But the thing was 30, 40 years of growth, abnormally fast. Why? There are squirrels coming along in 3 more days that needed all of that. And any kind of plants that we get food from, it's a couple of months from the time they germinate to the time you
Yes.
get any food. So we all would have starved to death if we had to rely upon gradual. So God rapidly brought them to maturity to do that. They weren't made mature, they were brought to maturity. There's a difference there.
Yes.
So why not the same sort of pattern on day 4? God forms the stars and other objects, by extension, astronomical bodies, in the same way that the plants could fulfill their function by bringing them up out of the ground rapidly. Why could God not bring the light very rapidly to us? And I think some of the passages we find in the prophetic and poetic books of the Old Testament talks about the stretching of the heavens.
Yes.
I'm wondering if that might be what it's talking about. I don't know. I don't want to be definitive. For a long time, I thought, like many people do, that that's referring to expansion of the universe. I don't think so anymore. I think there's something else during creation week that's finished. Some people I've shared this with. I've shared it with lay people. They like my solution. When I share it with other fellow creation scientists, they don't. And the hang-up they seem to have is that, well, you're applying, God did it, a miracle. I said, yeah, and your point is, I mean,
Yes.
this is creation week.
Yes.
God did it when he had the virgin birth and when he rose from the dead. Do you need scientific explanations for those? I don't think so.
But you also have your part with Adam. It doesn't say you're there, Adam. He molded us out
Shaped
of
and formed him, the process creation I'm
Yes.
talking about. So I'm thinking, why are we so embarrassed to talk about miracles taking place during the creation week? The writers of Hebrews and also I think the Colossians, Paul wrote about the sustaining of the creation today. And so I think what happened is during the creation week you had this creation stuff going on, creative acts, and that's not sustaining. But then as the creation week wore on, and certainly by the end of it, maybe in stages, but by the end, God had withdrawn to the point that he's no longer creating, but he's sustaining by the power of his word. And that sustaining, we tried to study the patterns we see there, and we call that physics.
Yes.
And you can't take your physics back prior to when sustaining was the norm. Back in the creation week, we have a problem. And I don't mind taking physics all the way back to the creation week. Once you hit the end of day 6, though, you better be prepared for some real surprises. So I'm not ashamed of, just because I'm a scientist, a physical scientist, I'm not ashamed to invoke a miracle here, because I think creation by its very nature is miraculous.
Exactly. That was his first miracle right there, was the creation.
Yeah. And I wrestled with the creation of this starlight time problem for over 30 years. And it was probably about 4 years ago, maybe 5, I started cogitating. I remember I was just thinking about it over Christmas break, and suddenly I started getting this breakthrough in my thinking there. And I started sharing it with people, but I didn't really publish it until almost 2 years ago. It would have been the summer of 2013 that I actually shared it in print with anyone.
Yep. See, there's no problem with me accepting God's miracle there, because we know it had to be a miracle, because only he can create out of nothing, because it started with nothing.
Yep.
Right? Put it there. And it's hard to say you're right or you're wrong in the creation ministry unless you invoke the billions of years. Then it's wrong.
Yeah, we've got at least 5 solutions.
Yes.
Take your pick if you don't.
Okay, so just wanted to share those 2 clips. First, Carl Sagan there, talking about his take on Genesis and creationism, and then Danny Faulkner, who's the creationist astronomer, trying to kind of deal with this whole ongoing problem of how to explain all the light between these distant stars and the viewer if they are millions of light years apart. And he comes up with this whole argument about, this process creation kind of idea. Or basically saying, well, it was a miracle, and the starlight between enabling Adam to see the stars from right after day 6 was no different than God forming Adam from the dirt, the dust of the earth, and things like this. And it's real interesting to watch these kinds of things now, especially when you're able to kind of step back and look at how you see modern creationism trying to just bend over backwards to try and find some way to bridge this gap, right? But it's interesting too, because he's essentially revealing that there's this sort of built-in assumption from his perspective, where it's fine to talk about miracles in the act of creation, in the 6-day creation, but then once that is over, he talks about God sustaining the creation, i.e. physics. So it's just indistinguishable from materialistic physics with gravity and the stars being massive fusion centers of atoms and all these things. The idea that the light that you're seeing is just photons coming from millions and millions of miles through space. But it's interesting because there's this artificial distinction. But if you really stop and think about it, if that's the argument that you're making, and this is what I think a lot of creationists have tried to kind of come up with, that God just must have created the light in transit, right? And it's okay to talk about the idea of it being miraculous if it's just encouched within creation, because then that doesn't bleed into our scientific approach to the sustaining of the universe. So it's very two-faced. Do you not see the double-mindedness of trying to ignore the millions of years of time but still retain the millions of light years of space? It makes no sense.